welcome everyone back to the IOA podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Malaika. And this is a space where we heal loudly and we live softly. If you are new here, come on in. I want you to find a seat. There's room for you here at our table. And if you have been walking with me since the very first season, since the very first episode, I want to say thank you for keeping me company. We are starting something new today. We are starting season number 3. And I am glad that you are here from the beginning of this particular season. So before we get into it, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping because, again, this community keeps growing and I want us to build with intention because that is important. If this show has met you somewhere, I have 3 quick asks, and you guys should know what it is if you've been watching the show long enough. First, please follow or subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or anywhere else that podcasts live. Next, following is really the single most powerful thing that you can do to help this work reach people who will need it. So if you do that, you're doing a lot. The second thing is if you are on Apple Podcasts, I'm asking that you leave a 5-star review with one honest sentence because reviews really do help new listeners decide whether or not to trust us with their time. And then third, share this episode with someone who has started over on their healing journey. It seems like probably 11 times this year and is tired of starting over. That is community care in action, and that is you helping them. Remember that all of our platforms are linked in the show notes and that the Substack companion to this particular episode is live, and our paid subscribers, as always, have extended practices waiting for them this week and one that's going to walk them through the whole rhythm that we are about to name in this particular episode. I'll tell you more about that at the close of the show. All right. Let's get into it because, like I said, this is the first episode of a brand new season, and I have been holding on to this over the break, and I think it's something that we need to talk about, and it's important. So let's get into our first segment. So we're going to talk about just framing what is happening here in this particular episode. So the IOA is really about a way of healing and a practice that you can actually keep. And so that is what we're going to get into as we start off the top of this episode. I want to start with something honest, and it's not often a flattering picture of any of us. Many of us may have a shelf in our house, or we may have a space where we collect things that we really don't like to look at. And you know what I'm talking about. It's the one where you have this journal that you purchased, or this planner that you purchased that you said that you were going to use. And it's that corner that's kind of with all of these things that are going to get you into a better flow, a better headspace, a better mindset. And it's pages that are filled temporarily. And then eventually the book or the planner or the thing gets stuck someplace else because it was brought with intention, but it's not being used in the way it should be used. It could be that you bought a set of oils, or you have candles that you wanted to use for a morning ritual or evening wind down that maybe you used a few times and then they got pushed to the side. And every one of those objects that I mentioned may have been purchased by another person who at the time was very much intentional with why they bought it, or you purchased it and at the time you really weren't intentional with the things that you were trying to do. You found a thing, you identified a tool, and you put it into practice. I want to name what is happening here because a lot of times I spend a good part of my professional life with people's inner lives. And as a psychologist and a professor, the thing that I can tell you is that a lot of times shame comes from us basically failing at our own self-care. And so it's probably the most common thing that we will see. We can identify that we have issues, but in this, one of the things that we often don't talk about enough is what happens when our intentions don't actually turn into action. It can turn up in the clinic, it can turn up in the classroom, it can turn up in research, it can turn up in my personal interactions. If that is a feeling that you know, then I want you to hear this before we go further. You didn't fail. The practice may have failed, and it failed for reasons that probably have nothing to do necessarily with your willpower. Most healing advice does not fail or practices because people lack discipline. Oftentimes it fails because it was designed for a life that no one actually has. It assumes that you have this quiet house. It assumes that you're going to have this hour of time, or you have money and privacy and a body that is not already carrying somebody else's needs before you get into your day. It assumes a version of you that actually does not exist on a random Tuesday. So ask the questions nobody asks out loud. Whose house was quiet enough for this? Whose morning had a spare hour just sitting around for you to use? Whose budget had something left at the end of the month to be able to do this? Whose body was not already carrying three other people's things before you even got to breakfast? If the answer to every one of those is somebody who is not you, then what broke was never your character. The timing of that matters. Right now, I think more so than usual. Between 2025 and 2026, and 2026 is not even over yet, anxiety has risen 9.3%, and depression has also risen 10.6%. More of us are struggling, not less. And so in this exact stretch of time, half of Americans have reported cutting spending on things like therapy, on gyms, on personal health. So I want you to sit with the shape of those two facts put together. We're more anxious and we are more depressed than we were a year ago. And we have less access to the very things that we're told would actually help. And that is not a discipline problem. That is a design problem. The care got more necessary and less affordable at the same time. And a whole lot of people are now sitting in the fact or in the gap in between being told to just try harder. So this episode really is for the person who has started over so many times that starting over has started to feel like their practice. It is for the person with the untouched journal, the abandoned app, the meditation cushion that is clearly currently holding something else like laundry. It's for the person who cannot afford the therapy that they need right now and is quietly ashamed of that fact, as though the price were their fault. It is for the person who does not necessarily need one more thing to add to their list. One more protocol, one more program, one more expensive promise. If any part of that is you, I want you to settle in. This whole season really, honestly, is for you. Here is the foundation or the term that I want you to name here, because it is the reason that this season actually exists. Season 2, we asked why we heal. So we spent 20 episodes on the why. We talked about why grief moves the way it does, why the body keeps the record, why our people carry what we carry. We also talked about why stillness is sacred ground. That work was necessary, and I would not trade any minute of the season for any of it. But a season about why will always leave one honest gap. It's going to leave something open, and this season is built to close that gap. It is the gap between understanding it and knowing what to do on a Wednesday or a Thursday when you're experiencing it. So season 3 teaches how to do what you need to do with the information that you have. So I like to call this the practice season. 20 episodes from today through the end of January, where we will go through and stop admiring the healing and actually start doing it in ordinary hands on ordinary days. So today we're going to walk through 4 things. 1, why the practice keeps failing you and how the wellness industry has quietly made your life the problem, instead of actually its products that they produce being the problem. 2, the 15 fronds. So we use fronds here because the fern is our symbol. And that's the map that basically is going to hold this whole method together and what a map is actually for. 3, REST, R-E-S-T is an acronym, the rhythm underneath everything. All right. That's the R, which is the reconnect, embody, speak, and tend. And 4, the practice itself starting small enough for us to actually keep with it. And that's the I of pause as a doorway in. So this is not a new year, new you episode. That's not what we're doing here. It's in September or any other month of the year. I really am here to hand you a, a way to go forward and not a 30-day challenge. And I am not going to ask you to overhaul your life. And so that's not going to be done here. You do not need an overhaul. And I said that last season. You need something small, you need something repeatable, something free that's yours. That is the whole promise of this season. And I intend to keep it. So, like we talked about last season, the fact that we're buried underneath the things. So, we are going to start to do the excavation work here in season number 3. Let's begin. Welcome back, everyone. And so we're going to talk about why the practice keeps failing you. And I think that this is important. I wanted to start in the body, which is always what I like to do, because the story we tell about failed healing practices is almost always a story about character. And the truth is almost always a story about the nervous system. Here's what is actually happening when you start a new practice. You get inspired and you design something ambitious because ambition feels like you're committed. 30 minutes of journaling a day, a 5 a.m. wake up, the whole workbook in 3 weeks. And for about 4 days, it works beautifully and you feel like a person who has finally figured it out. Then day 5 arrives when a sick child or a deadline or a phone call from your mother comes in and you miss it. And here's the part that matters the most, because this is where the practice usually goes to die. It is not the missing, it is what you do with the missing. You feel the small sting of having broken the streak, and then your body reads that sting as failure, and failure is a threat. And so the nervous system feels that threatening moving around, and it means you're moving away from the source. So the next day, you avoid the journal. And it's just a little bit, because looking at it makes you feel bad. And then by day 9, the journal is not a tool anymore. It becomes evidence to your failure. And do you hear what happened? The practice designed to soothe your nervous system became a thing that your nervous system now avoids. And we do this over and over and over. Each round teaches the body the same lesson, which is that healing is a thing you fail at. And I want to be careful here, because I am not standing on this hill telling you all that wellness is a scam. Of course it's not. You know that that's why I'm here. I don't call myself community healer for nothing. I am about our people being well. I'm a psychologist. I believe in therapy. I teach psychology, and I want good care in the hands of every person who needs it. Good care changes lives. But I would be lying to you if I didn't name what has happened to the wellness industry over the last decade plus, because it is doing real damage to people in general. Wellness has gotten expensive. And then on top of that, it's gotten exclusive. And then on top of that, we've started selling it as an identity. It literally is a multi-trillion-dollar industry now. And I want you to think about what that means structurally. An industry that size cannot survive on you being well. And we could talk about the medical system and the medical industry and how this works. It survives really on you being almost well. So never really want to cure the issue, but we just want you kind of there so that you always need to keep coming back. It survives on the next thing happening to you. So the offer is never the practice, it's the upgrade, the treatment, the supplement, the app subscription, the aesthetic. And then when the thing that you bought doesn't work, the industry has a very convenient explanation ready, which is that you did not commit effectively. And so, side note, we will pay for an app that reminds us to breathe, and then swear on everything that we cannot find 5 quiet minutes. And some of us are still paying for a subscription that we have not opened since March of this year or since January of this year, because canceling it would mean admitting we never used it. And we would rather pay the money than have that conversation with ourselves about whether or not this tool was effective for us. And now look at where we are. Half of Americans have cut spending on therapy, gyms, personal health, while anxiety and depression has climbed almost 10% in a single year. What that means in practice is that an enormous number of people are being priced out of wellness precisely when they need it the most. And they're carrying that as a private failing rather than a public condition. Notice how often the apologies show up. Women apologizing for not being able to afford weekly sessions, as though rest and support were things you earn by having enough money left over at the end of the month. And I want you to notice the questions that your mind reaches for when this happens, because they are always the same four. What was wrong with me? Why can everybody else keep this? Why do I always do this? What is it going to take for me to get this together? Four questions, and not one of them is about the design of the thing that you were actually handed. So let me name three real reasons that practices fail, because I think naming them takes some of the weight off of you. The first is that the practice was too big. Not too hard, but too big. So your nervous system needs to experience a practice as safe and available before it can let it become something that's automatic. So a 30-minute ritual is not available on the worst day of your month or your life, or the worst day of your month is exactly the day that you need it, right? If the practice only works on your good days, it's not really a practice, it's a hobby. The second is that the practice was never yours. It came from someone whose life does not look like yours, whose house is quieter than yours, whose obligations are lighter than yours, whose grandmother did not teach her, what your grandmother taught you. So these are borrowed practices, and they can be lovely, and they sound great, and they look amazing on social media. And I use these borrowed practices, but a practice with no root in my actual life will not survive my actual life. The third is that the practice had no rhythm. And so, I'm big on rhythm. It was a straight line, it was a streak, you had a 30-day sprint, and a straight line breaks the first time life bends. You're not going to be able to keep in that line. Nothing living grows in a straight line. In my book, I called this frond the rhythm. All right, frond number 4. And so I'm saying this workbook because the workbook's not out yet. So you guys are getting some exclusive information. And one of the things we talk about is frond 4, its root truth is one of my favorite sentences I have ever written. Basically, that healing does not hasten, it heeds. Healing does not hasten, it heeds. So let me explain this in a little bit more detail, plainly. And I want you to actually receive what I'm saying. You're not bad at healing. You just have been given or handed it practices that are built for a life that you're not actually living. You're being sold by an industry that needs you to keep buying things and then tells you that the breakdown in the system was a character flaw and not the system itself. That is not shame for you to carry. So put it down. We are going to build something together, something else that is going to belong exclusively to you, that will be catered exclusively to you. Let's take a break here. When we get back, we're going to talk about the 15 fronds and what they actually mean to your healing process. Be back in just a second. Welcome back. And so let's keep moving into this. Underneath those 15 fronds that we've already highlighted and presented to you at the beginning of the episode, there's one rhythm that repeats. So there's 4 movements in the same order every time. And I call it R.E.S.T, R-E.S.T. So it stands for the reconnect. It stands for embody. It stands for speak and tend. Reconnect, embody, speak, tend. R.E.S.T was not a whiteboard exercise. It really did come out of years of research, clinical, scholarly work, out of studying what actually helps people, actually looking back historically what our people as a diaspora have already done, and out of noticing that the same four movements keep showing up in work. If you're doing grief work, it can show up in your body. Somebody you've been in conflict with in relationship, it can show up at the family table. The content may change, but the rhythm does not. So for reconnect, this is where every frond actually begins, and it's the shortest of the four. Before you read anything, before you write anything, before you decide anything, your body has to arrive. And so this is the eye of pause, the practice that opens every single frond. It is not a warm up that you can skip. It is a difference between doing the healing work from a braced nervous system or doing it from a settled one. And so I promise you that those two things produce different answers to the same question. So looking at the E, embody, this is where the work actually moves out of your head and into your hands, your breath, your feet, your skin. It moves literally into your physiology. A candle may be lit, a walk with no destination, right? A hand on your heart. We are a very analytical people about our pain, and analysis alone is not going to release what's happening in your body. And so it's important for us to pay attention to what is happening to us physically. And then in frond number 4, we talk about the rhythm. The embodied practice that goes with that is beautifully simple. Begin a day with music that grounds you, or take a walk that doesn't have a destination, or let your pace find itself instead of rushing it to what you believe it's supposed to be. That is how we embody. Next, we have speak. So this is where it gets real, because sometimes something changes when a truth actually leaves the body as sound. It can be to a person, it can be on a page, it can be to an empty kitchen, 6 a.m. when no one's around. And frond number 1, the root, the speak it practice is the name one ancestor or elder out loud and thank them for a specific gift that they passed down to you. And so you say the name out loud. You don't think it, you say it. And speaking things gives witness. And to the T, tend. And this is the one I feel that everybody skips. It's the one that determines whether or not any of this survives past today. Tending is the small, repeated act that carries the work into ordinary times. So in the workbook, it's going to look like a weekly practice, a 7-day tracker. And I want you to be clear that the tracker is not there to grade you. It is there because you do need to have structure, and the body learns safety through repetition. And so it gives you that. It's a practice with a place is easier than keeping one that has, no destination, that kind of floats out there. So here is what I love about this rhythm and why I built a whole season on it. R.E.S.T is a circle. It's not a ladder. So you don't graduate from one level to the next. You don't go from reconnect and then you graduate to the next level. You come back to it every single time at the top of every frond and at the top of every hard day. And then when you fall out of the rhythm, and you will, because we always do, you don't restart at the beginning of some 30-day count. You just reconnect. That's it. Re-entry, one breath, and you're back in. So think about how a garden actually behaves across a year, because this is the whole argument that's standing outside in the dirt. No one walks out in, say, February of a year and demands to know why the beds are not producing flowers. No one accuses a fern of quitting because it pulled back in the cold. The garden spends part of the year making the part of the year that it's keeping, and the keeping is not a failure of the making. It's what makes the next spring possible. So weather will come through, and some of it is actually going to be hard. And so the garden has to do what it does in a protective way. It does not negotiate because it can't. It bends and adjusts. It may lose a few fronds, so it holds on at the root, but you may come back and at the first real warmth without necessarily a word of apology from all the weeks of harsh weather, you'll notice that you may be down a frond or two. That's part of the rhythm. And I am asking you to trust in yourself as you go through this process. You're going to have dry stretches, and they're not evidence that you're not a gardener or you're not doing what you're supposed to do. They are part of the year when the work went underground. And so notice the acronym itself, because that acronym was not an accident. You know what I talk about. The four movements spell rest for a reason. In a culture that has made rest into either a luxury item or a moral failure, I wanted the method itself to say the word every time you used it. Frond number 5, the disruption, puts it this way. Every pause, every rest, every ritual is a disruption of the disruption. So you are a sacred interruption. I also want to name what rest actually costs, because that is the part of the argument today that I think needs to be highlighted. It costs nothing. There is no subscription. There is no equipment. Reconnect needs breath. Embody needs a body that you already have. Speak needs a voice that you already have. And 10 just needs about 2 minutes of your time and something to make a mark with. In a year when half of us have cut what we spend on our own health, I think it matters enormously to say plainly that the core of this method is free 99. And that free does not mean lesser than, it just means it costs you nothing to actually embody wellness. Our grandparents ran this rhythm without any kind of apps, without social media, without the internet. If it worked then, it can work now. And I think that that's important. So when we come back, we're going to get into the practice, and we're going to talk about starting small enough in order for you to be able to keep up with this long term. So we'll be back in just a second. So let's talk about what to actually do this week, because I never want to leave you with all of these lofty, beautiful ideas and no way for you to actually live it out. So the foundation, as always on this show, we know is the eye of pause. If you're new here, so this is your first time listening to the show, the eye of pause is not a break that you earn after the to-do list is finally done. It is a break that you take on purpose. So you do it in the middle of a life that is trying to take this from you. Named for the eye of the fern, we've talked about this already. It basically endures in shade, stone, etc. The pause is a reminder that you are allowed to be still. You're allowed to be rooted even in the hardest of conditions. So in a world that has basically turned profits from you hurrying and rushed culture, stopping on purpose is a quiet act of resistance, and it's a way that you return. So because this episode sits in frond number 1, the root, I want to give you the specific pause that I think opens that frond. And it's called rooted breathing or rooted breath. Sit where your feet can reach the floor, and then let both soles be able to lay flat, comfortably relaxed. Like the fern, you're settling into the soil. I want you to close your eyes or soften your gaze if you're listening to this while you're driving. Breathe in slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Imagine literally the breath traveling down your spine and into the ground beneath you. Holding for a count of 4. And then I want you to breathe out of your mouth for a count of 6. And as you breathe out, let your shoulders drop and feel the relaxation happen. I want you to repeat this 4 times until your body literally feels a little bit lighter, and you feel things slowing down, and you feel a little bit more present. Then I want you to place your hand on your chest, and I want you to say quietly, I am here and I am held. That's the whole doorway. Under a minute. And then I want to say something about that minute, because I know the objection that's probably rising in some of you right now is that a minute cannot possibly be enough. It can't be impactful. Here's the answer that I'll give you. A minute that you actually take is infinitely more impactful than an hour that you keep meaning to take and never actually get to it. And more than that, the minute is not the point. The return is the point. So every time you take that pause, you're now teaching your nervous system a very specific lesson, which is that stopping is safe for you to do and that you are a person who will come back to yourself and do it continually. The lesson is what makes everything else that we're talking about later on possible. Now, let me give you the shape of 1 week using the R.E.S.T format. And I'm going to keep it as simple as possible deliberately, almost insultingly small, because small, I feel, is the strategy. Reconnect and do one rooting breath a day. That's the reconnect. One, I want you to attach it to something that you already do without thinking about it. So if the first thing you do in the morning is get that cup of coffee, or the moment that you're in the car and it's in park before you go into your office building, or the minute after you brush your teeth at night, don't create a new slot in the day. Use the slots that you already have, because you may not have new slots to give, right? Hang the particular practice on something that you're already doing. All right. That's what's important. Most of us don't have days that has the place for us to put new slots in it. And so by hooking it to something that you already know and already there, you're more than likely going to get it done. And so remember, we're talking about next embody. So once this week, I want you to walk without a destination. So disconnect having to check off something and let the pace that you're walking find itself. So if your walking is not available, then maybe you play a song all the way through. We don't have anything else to do. And that's the whole assignment. Something very simple. I want you to notice what your body does when it's allowed to move at its own pace instead of borrowing one or moving at the pace that the world says you're supposed to move at. Speaking it once this week, name one name out loud. And I want you to specifically think about an ancestor, an elder, a grandparent, great aunt, someone who's made a way for you, who opened a door so that you could walk through. Say the name, say it out loud, and then say one specific thing that they passed down to you. Don't be general. Don't just say thank you. Be specific. She gave me my voice. He gave me the way that I laugh. Or it could be you laugh too loud, and that might be something distinctive that is connected to that person. He or she gave me the stubbornness that has allowed me to push forward and stay alive and push through all types of adversity. If you don't know their names, which is possible because of our history as a people, that thread might still be sensitive, or you still might be filling in the record because that is broken for you. It's okay. Say what you do have. Identify what was passed down to you, even if you're still figuring out the name attached to it. And then finally, tend. So at the end of this first week, I just want you to have one sentence, not a whole page, just one sentence about what changed for you and what didn't. Put it anywhere. If you got that journal that's been sitting there, could put it in there. The back of a receipt, right, is a perfect place for this. Just make sure that you put it down. All right. That's week 1. That's it. That's the whole week. All right. 1 minute a day, one walk, one name. All right. One sentence. And I can already hear someone probably thinking that this is too small. It can't have impact. It can't matter. And if you're like most of us, you're not only thinking it, you're already quietly convincing yourself and designing a bigger version of this in your head. And with a few more steps in it, what's going to happen? You feel like it counts. You're going to put the pen down. You're going to want answers directly because it's the most important thing that you feel like you will get. And then you will negate the fact that small is not the compromise. Small is the mechanism. A practice becomes a practice when a part of you can go through it continually through the repetition. It's not about the intensity. The repetition requires that the practice be small enough for you to survive in your worst week and still do it anyway. Dr. Wendy Wood, she's provost and professor emerita of psychology and business at the University of Southern California. And she's also the author of the book, Good Habits, Bad Habits, which is a science of making positive changes that stick. spent decades studying how a behavior actually becomes something automatic. And what she found is not flattering to the way that we usually talk about this. Habits are built by repetition in a stable setting, not by motivation, not by intensity. Motivation is what starts a thing. And motivation is unreliable because it is a feeling, and feelings come from places where, depending on the situation, it can come and go. So, what holds is the small action that's actually done in the same place at the same scene of the day over and over and over again until your body stops asking permission and it just starts doing it automatically. So, if you build a practice that only fits your best days, you have built something that actually abandons what exactly you will need or when you will need it. But a practice that fits inside a bad Tuesday, inside a hospital waiting room, inside of 10 minutes before everyone wakes up and your house is chaotic, that is a practice that will still be with you in a year and 10 years from now. And here's my one rule for everyone this season, which I would like you to write down somewhere so you can see it. When you miss it, you do not start over. You just start again. Remember, there's no streak to break. There's only the next return. And that is what a rhythm actually is. And so, one more thing that I want to highlight, or one more word I want to be careful about and clear about, is that this is not a replacement for care. And so I say this to you all the time. If you're in real crisis, if what surface becomes bigger than what you can hold alone, please reach out for a person. So a therapist, a doctor, crisis line, a friend who can sit with you. I know care costs money right now, and I know that is not a small barrier, but I'm not going to pretend otherwise that you may not need to sit with someone. There are sliding scales, there are community clinics, there are people who will see you. This practice is meant to hold you between the sessions and beside the support, never instead of it. All right. So small is important. Small is holy, so slow is holy, and so is asking for help. And so I wanted to say that before I send you guys off for this episode. So before I let you go, I want to leave you with this one question. And I do not want you to answer it quickly. I tell you guys this all the time when I give you these questions at the end of the episodes. I want you to sit in it, maybe during your first rooting breath this week. What would you keep if you only had to keep one small thing? Not the whole program, not the ideal version of your healing, one small thing sized to the life that you actually have. Because whatever answers rise up in you is probably the thing that your body actually is asking for and has been asking for all along. So underneath all these ambitious plans that you have, you keep designing for a version of you that does not actually exist. So to the one that has that shelf with the abandoned practices and tools and resources, the shelf is not a record of your failure. It's a record of how many times you tried, which is a very different thing. And it's proof that some part of you has never stopped at least believing that you're worth tending. You didn't lack commitment. You were handed the wrong tools, the wrong size, and to the one who has cut back on your therapy or the gym or anything else that you needed this year because the money is just simply not there. I understand that. That is not a moral failing on your part. It's not a personal defeat. It is what happens when care gets sold as a luxury good. Your healing does not require a receipt. The oldest part of this practice were never meant to be sold. And to the one who has been basically carrying everybody else, and we know who we are, and who has already calculated that there literally is no room in the day for you personally, this is also your invitation. We're not asking you to add something. We're asking you to reclaim 1 minute that already belongs to you anyway. You're allowed to be still and rooted even in the hardest of conditions, especially in the hardest of conditions. And that is the whole meaning of the fern. So here's what I want you to do and take with you this week. Well, number one, you did not fail your healing practice. It was built for a life that nobody actually has, and the breakdown was in the design, not in you. Two, a practice that you can keep has to be small, has to be repeatable, has to be free, and has to be yours. If it only works on your good days, it is not a practice yet. Number 3, the 15 fronds are map, not a to-do list. Go at your own pace, move in spirals, and remember that there is no behind, there's only forward. 4, rest is the rhythm underneath everything. And that rest and that rhythm is important to what we are doing. So as always, when I end the show, I wanted to highlight and remind you of these key things. And hopefully you'll stay with us for the entire season as we go further into this journey of looking at basically taking what we identified and what we know and now putting into practice things to move that knowledge into action. And so remember, you can always find me on any platform where podcasts live. So I am on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or any of the other places that you can find podcasts and where they live. Remember that there is a Substack companion, so we would love for you to join us on Substack. It is the IOA, AYAWAY. You can find us on Substack to get the companions. We would love to have you actually subscribe. If you're a paid subscriber, you get all the goodies. And then remember, you can follow me on social media. And so there's 2 handles that you can find on Instagram and Facebook, Dr. Malaika Speaks. And then also on Instagram alone, you can find me at the IOA. And so that is the other way for you to find the work out there. And remember, all this will be in the notes so that you can just click to the links to get to the different ways to find us. I'm also on TikTok. And so I am at Doc M. Breezy. So you can also find me on TikTok. But I would love for you to go back, listen to some of these episodes from the previous 2 seasons, catch up with the work where we are, and stay with us as we continue to move further into season number 3. And as always, remember that we are healing loudly and we're living softly here in the IOA. Until next Tuesday, have a great one.